The coffee cup shattered against the marble floor of our kitchen, sending ceramic shards across the pristine tiles like fragments of my broken heart. Emma stood frozen by the doorway, her overnight bag still clutched in her trembling hands. Mascara streaked down her cheeks in perfect black rivers. For the first time in 3 months, she looked genuinely remorseful. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. Alex, I can explain, she whispered, but her voice carried the hollow ring of someone who knew their words held no weight anymore. I stared at the phone in my hand, the video still playing on loop. Ryan Mitchell, her precious first love. The man she'd thrown away 7 years of marriage for, was pressed against a brunette in a red dress, outside some upscale Vancouver restaurant. Her kiss was passionate, desperate, completely oblivious to the world around them. The timestamp showed yesterday, just hours after Emma had driven north to work things out with him. Explain what exactly? I asked, my voice eerily calm as I set the phone down on the granite countertop. Explain how you've been living a lie, or explain how the man you destroyed our marriage for has already moved on to someone prettier, younger, more successful than you. Emma's face crumpled, and for a split second, I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. Then I remembered the divorce papers she'd served me with last week. The ones where she demanded half of everything I'd built from nothing while she was off playing. House with her college sweetheart. That video. Where did you get it? She stammered, dropping her bag. Designer clothes spilled across our floor. The same floor where we'd once danced on New Year's Eve, where she'd promised me forever. Does it matter? I turned away from her, walking toward the floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked Elliott Bay. The Seattle skyline glittered in the distance. A reminder of how far I'd come since we'd first met at Pike Place Market all those years ago. The question is, what are you doing here, Emma? I thought you were building your new life with Ryan. Silence stretched between us like a chasm. I could hear her breathing, quick and panicked. The sound of someone whose carefully constructed fantasy had just imploded in real time. He told me she was just a business associate, she finally said, her voice small and defeated. He said the photos on social media were just networking events. I laughed, but there was no humor in it. And you believed him? The same way you believed him when he promised to leave his ex-girlfriend for you in college? The same way you believed him when he said he'd changed? That he was ready to commit this time? You don't understand. Emma's voice grew stronger, more defensive. What Ryan and I have is real. It's always been real. We have history, Alex. We have a connection that goes back to when we were teenagers. You can't just dismiss that. Really look at her. Emma Rodriguez had always been beautiful, with her dark hair and expressive brown eyes, the kind of woman who could walk into a room and command attention without trying. But standing there in our kitchen, surrounded by the remnants of our life, together, she looked smaller somehow, diminished. You're right, I said quietly. I can't dismiss your history with Ryan. Just like you couldn't dismiss it when you walked out on our marriage 3 months ago. The morning Emma left, I thought, my world had ended. I'd built Chen and Associates from a one-person operation in a cramped Fremont apartment to one of Seattle's most successful digital marketing firms. I'd done it all for us, for the future we were supposed to have together. The corner office overlooking the Sound, the house in Bellevue, with the perfect garden Emma had always dreamed of. The European honeymoon we'd finally taken 5 years into our marriage. None of it mattered to her when Ryan Mitchell walked back into her life. Ryan wasn't just any ex-boyfriend. He was Emma's first everything. First love, first heartbreak, first taste of the kind of passion that burns hot and fast and leaves scars that never quite heal. They'd met during freshman orientation at the University of Washington. 2 kids from small towns who thought they'd found their soulmates in the chaos of college life. For 3 years, they were inseparable, the kind of couple that made everyone else feel inadequate by comparison. Then Ryan graduated and moved to Silicon Valley for a tech job, promising Emma he'd send for her once he got settled. The promises turned into phone calls. The phone calls turned into texts, and eventually the texts stopped coming altogether. Emma spent her senior year heartbroken, throwing herself into her graphic design studies and swearing off serious relationships. That's where I came in. I met Emma 6 months after graduation at a coffee shop near Pike Place Market. She was freelancing, designing logos for local businesses, and I was just starting my own marketing consultancy. We bonded over shared struggles of entrepreneurship, late nights fueled by espresso, and ambition. What started as friendship slowly bloomed into something deeper, more stable than the whirlwind romance she'd had with Ryan. We were good together. Emma and I, complementary. She brought creativity and spontaneity to my methodical, strategic mind. I gave her security and consistency she'd never had with Ryan's hot and cold emotional style. We built something solid, brick by brick, year by year, or so I thought. The first crack appeared 2 years ago when Ryan's tech startup, Novatech Solutions, started making headlines. Suddenly, he was the golden boy of the Vancouver tech scene, featured on magazine covers and invited to speak at conferences. Emma began following his company's social media accounts, casually mentioning his successes during dinner conversations. "Did you see Ryan's company just secured $15 million in Series B funding?" she'd say, showing me articles on her phone. "He's really made something of himself." I didn't think much of it at first. It seemed natural that she'd be curious about an old friend's success. The casual mentions became more frequent, more wistful. She started comparing his achievements to mine, not directly, but in subtle ways that made me feel like I was constantly being measured against a ghost from her past. The second crack came when Ryan reached out directly. A simple LinkedIn message. That Emma showed me with what seemed like casual transparency. He was expanding Novatech's operations and looking for a creative director for their Seattle office. Would Emma be interested in consulting on some initial projects? It's just business. Emma assured me when I expressed concern. "Ryan believes in my work. This could be a huge step forward for my career," Emma had said. I wanted to believe her. More than that, I wanted to support her. She'd often felt overshadowed by my success. No matter how much I tried to include her as an equal partner in both our life and work, if collaborating with Ryan's company gave her the validation she needed, who was I to stand in the way? It began modestly, some logo mock-ups and a few marketing pieces for a product launch in Seattle. But soon, the project grew. Ryan began, involving her in strategy sessions and late-night brainstorming meetings. Emma would come home buzzing with energy I hadn't seen in a long time, rambling about user engagement and brand architecture. "Ryan really listens when I speak," she said once, her eyes lit up with excitement. "He values my creative input more than any client I've ever worked with." That should have been my first red flag, the way she said his name with unfamiliar softness, the care she put into her wardrobe before meeting him, dressing like someone who wanted to be noticed again. The way she clung to her phone, her face lighting up with every ping. But I was distracted, juggling 3 major campaigns. And trying to land a game-changing deal with a Fortune 500 company. I trusted Emma. I trusted our marriage. I believed that 7 years of shared history meant more than the echoes of a teenage romance. The real breaking point came on a wet Tuesday in October. Emma was supposed to be in a client meeting, but Marcus, my business partner, saw her at a Capitol Hill wine bar, laughing and touching the arm of a man who clearly wasn't a client. His description made my stomach turn. When I confronted her, she didn't deny it. What she did was worse. She told the truth. "Ryan and I have been talking," she said quietly, pouring a glass of wine as her hands trembled. "We've been having honest conversations for the first time in 15 years. About our past. About what went wrong. What kind of mistakes?" I asked, though I already feared the answer. "He never stopped loving me, Alex. And deep down, I never stopped loving him. We were just kids then, too immature to fight. For what we had, but we're not kids anymore. We know what we want now." It was like being hit in the chest. "And what you want isn't us?" I asked. She looked around the kitchen at the life we'd created from the ground up. For a moment, I thought she might remember, might decide it was still worth it. "What we have is comfortable," she said after a long pause. "It's safe. It's predictable, but it's not enough. Ryan reminds me what it feels like to really be alive." That's when I knew I hadn't lost her to a man, exactly. I'd lost her to a memory, to a version of herself she wanted to reclaim. It's to the fantasy of something more electric than steady. The next few weeks dissolved into a blur of attorneys and mediators. Emma got a place downtown not for space, like she claimed, but to be closer to Ryan's Seattle office. She filed for divorce, citing irreconcilable differences, and demanded half of everything, even a stake in the company I had built from scratch, long before she ever entered my life. That company, Chin and Associates, was my legacy. The result of years of missed holidays, sleepless nights, and sacrifices she used to resent. Now she wanted a piece of it. It's only fair, her lawyer said at mediation. She supported his career and contributed to the household. She's entitled to compensation. I wanted to laugh. Emma's so-called contributions mostly involved telling me I worked too hard and urging me to hire more help so I could spend more time with her. But in Washington, a community property state, the law didn't care about context. While our attorneys fought over percentages and payments, Emma threw herself into her new relationship like someone on a mission to make up for lost time. She plastered social media with curated snapshots, romantic dinners, scenic wine country retreats, perfectly filtered images of her and Ryan. Her relationship status shifted from married to it's complicated too in a relationship. In 2 weeks flat, I stopped looking after I saw a photo of them standing in the exact spot where Emma and I had first met, Pike Place Market. The caption read, "Sometimes the universe gives you a second chance with your soulmate." Was the day I deleted all my social media accounts and dove into work like it was oxygen. If she wanted half the business, I was going to make damn sure there was more business to split. I secured the Fortune 500 deal, brought in new clients, and expanded the team by almost half. My employees were concerned I was headed for burnout, but work was the only thing keeping me functional. Marcus tried to convince me to fight harder to bring up the affair and go after a smaller settlement. I didn't have it in me to drag this out. I just wanted it over. When the divorce was finalized on a bleak February morning, Emma walked away with the house, a good chunk of my liquid assets, a cut of my business revenue for 5 years. I kept control of the company. That was my win, quiet, hollow, but mine. That afternoon, she texted me, "Thank you for not making this harder than it had to be. I hope you find happiness, Alex. You deserve it." I deleted it without replying. What was there to say? That I hoped she and Ryan found joy in their second go-around? That I forgave her? I wasn't that generous. Not yet. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. For 3 months, I heard nothing about Emma's new life except through mutual friends who tried to be diplomatic in their updates. She and Ryan were taking things slow, they said, really getting to know each other again as adults. Building something solid this time instead of rushing into anything. I focused on my work and tried not to think about what taking things slow meant for two people who'd been sleeping together for the better part of 6 months. I sold the Bellevue house, too. Many memories, and moved into a sleek downtown condo with views of the Space Needle. I dated occasionally, nothing serious. Just dinner companions who didn't ask too many questions about why a successful 35-year-old man was suddenly single. Then last week, Lisa Wong, Emma's best friend since college, sent me a Facebook. The message that changed everything. "Alex, I know this is probably the last thing you want to hear from me, but I thought you should know. Emma's been asking about you. A lot. She's been having some problems with Ryan, and I think she's starting to realize she made a mistake. I probably shouldn't be telling you this, but she's been talking about reaching out to you." I stared at the message for a long time before deleting it. Whatever problems Emma was having with Ryan weren't my concern anymore. I'd given her everything she'd asked for in the divorce, including my blessing to pursue her happiness elsewhere. That happiness was proving more elusive than she'd expected. It wasn't my responsibility to provide an alternative. But curiosity is a powerful thing, and despite my best intentions, I found myself wondering what kind of problems could have developed so quickly in paradise. That's when I remembered Marcus's connections in the Vancouver tech scene, a few discreet inquiries revealed more than I'd bargained for. Ryan's company was struggling. Series B funding Emma had been so impressed by was mostly spent, and they were having trouble securing additional investment. Worse, Ryan's reputation in the industry was less golden than his social media presence suggested. There were whispers about his management style, his tendency to overpromise and underdeliver, his pattern of burning through talented employees. But the most interesting information came from a former Novatech employee who'd moved to Seattle and joined one of our competitor firms. Ryan had a girlfriend in Vancouver, had been seeing her for over a year. Her name was Sophie Kim, and she was a marketing director at a major tech corporation. The kind of accomplished professional who looked good at industry events and understood the demands of startup life. Sophie was everything Emma wasn't: younger, more successful in her own right, and apparently content to be Ryan's plus one at networking events without demanding he reorganize his entire life around their relationship. She was also, according to the photos I found through my research, strikingly beautiful in a polished, corporate way that made Emma's artistic bohemian style look almost amateurish by comparison. The video I'd shown Emma this morning was a result of a private investigator I'd hired to confirm what I'd already suspected. I'd told myself I was just gathering information for my own peace of mind. But watching Emma's face crumble as she realized her great love story was built on lies had been more satisfying than I'd expected. Now she was standing in my kitchen, surrounded by the ruins of her carefully packed life, asking me to believe that her betrayal had somehow been justified by true love. The same true love that was apparently disposable enough for Ryan to risk it all on a younger model. So what happens now? I asked, genuinely curious about her answer. Do you go back to Vancouver and fight for him? Or do you finally accept that maybe Ryan Mitchell isn't the man you've been telling yourself he is? Emma looked up at me, and for a moment I saw a flash of the woman I'd fallen in love with all those years ago. Vulnerable, uncertain, but still beautiful in her imperfection. I don't know, she admitted. I thought I knew what I wanted, but everything's so confused now. Ryan's been distant lately, making excuses not to see me. I thought it was just work stress, but now you know the truth, I finished for her. The question is, what are you going to do about it? She bent down to gather her scattered clothes, and I noticed her hands were still shaking. When she straightened up, her expression had hardened into something more familiar, the defensive mask she'd worn throughout our divorce proceedings. I'm going to go back to Vancouver and confront him, she said, with more conviction than I think she felt. There has to be an explanation. This Sophie person could be anyone. Ex-girlfriend, business partner, someone he's letting down easy. That video doesn't prove anything definitive. I nodded slowly, recognizing the same stubborn denial that had kept her chasing Ryan for months after he'd first disappeared from her life. Some people, I'd learned, would rather live in a beautiful lie than face an ugly truth. And if there isn't an explanation? I asked. If Ryan confirms what that video already shows, that he's moved on to someone who fits better into his life than you do? For the first time since she'd walked back into my kitchen, Emma looked genuinely afraid. Not just of losing Ryan, but of what losing Ryan would mean about every choice she'd made in the last year. It's about what it would say about her judgment, her worth, her fundamental understanding of love and relationships. Then I'll figure it out, she said, but her voice lacked conviction. I'm not the same person I was when we were married, Alex. I can't go backward. No, I agreed. You can't. Neither can I. She picked up her bag and headed toward the door, then paused with her hand on the handle. Alex, I know I don't have the right to ask this, but if things don't work out with Ryan, don't. I cut her off before she could finish the thought. Don't even think about it. You made your choice, Emma. You don't get to hedge your bets now. She nodded, not meeting my eyes, and walked out of my life for what I hoped would be the final time. I watched through the window as she loaded her car, noting the way her shoulders shook with barely contained sobs. Part of me, the part that had loved her for 7 years, wanted to go after her, to offer comfort and maybe even reconciliation. But the larger part, the part that had spent 3 months rebuilding my life from scratch, stayed exactly where I was. Emma had chosen her path when she walked out on our marriage. The fact that her chosen path was leading somewhere she didn't want to go wasn't my problem to solve anymore. I picked up my phone and deleted the video, then scrolled through my contacts until I found Diana's number. My sister had been my rock throughout the divorce, offering support without judgment and reminding me that my worth wasn't tied to Emma's ability to appreciate it. "Hey," Diana answered on the second ring. "How did it go?" "About how you'd expect," I said, walking over to pour myself a cup of coffee from the pot Emma had been too distracted to notice. "She's going back to Vancouver to fight for him. Even after she saw the video, especially after seeing the video, she's convinced there must be some harmless explanation for Ryan kissing another woman." Diana let out a sigh, and I could practically see her shaking her head in that big sister way she'd perfected over the years, equal parts exasperation and protectiveness toward a brother who'd always been too willing to believe the best in people. "Alex, promise me something," she said. "If things fall apart between her and Ryan, don't take her back." "I won't," I said, and I meant it. That part of my life is over. Whatever happens next, Emma's not a part of it. "Good," she replied, voice firm. "Glad you deserve someone who chooses you first. It's not someone who runs back when the fantasy doesn't pan out." After we hung up, I stood alone in the kitchen, reflecting on the choices people make and what those choices say about who they really are. Emma had picked excitement over security, dreams over reality, possibility over commitment, and she'd gotten exactly what she wanted, though clearly not what she'd expected. Made a decision, the same one I'd been making daily for months. Now, I chose to keep moving forward. I poured my energy into the business I'd built, the friendships I still had, and the future I was shaping for myself. I stopped obsessing over what I'd lost and started imagining what I could still create. Tomorrow, Emma would head back to Vancouver and confront Ryan about Sophie Kim. She'd likely discover that her grand love story was little more than a man hedging his bet, stringing her along while still involved with someone else. She'd probably call her friend Lisa, crying about how she'd sacrificed everything for a guy who never even bothered to end his last relationship. Meanwhile, I'd still be in Seattle, focused on building something solid, something real without the emotional wreckage that had come from trying to keep a failing marriage alive. The irony wasn't lost on me. In losing Emma, I'd found a clearer, more driven version of myself, a version that wasn't constantly bending over backward to keep someone else happy. My phone buzzed with a message from Marcus. "Dinner tonight? New client wants to meet the team." I told him we'd show him around Seattle nightlife. I smiled and texted back, "I'm in. Just promise it's not some Capitol Hill wine bar. Relax." I was thinking rooftop downtown, great views, killer cocktails, and no emotional landmines. I laughed for the first time in a while. "You're speaking my language," I replied. As I got ready to meet Marcus and the client, I thought about that video, the one that had brought Emma back into my life one final time. Tomorrow, I'd call the private investigator and formally end the surveillance. Emma knew about Sophie now. Whatever happened next between her and Ryan was no longer my concern. I had my own life to live. And for the first time since the split, I was genuinely looking forward to it. The broken coffee mug was still on the floor, shards catching the sunlight streaming through the window. I grabbed a broom and swept it all up just like I'd been doing with my life, cleaning up the wreckage piece by piece. Some things, once shattered, couldn't be put back together. But that didn't mean I had to leave the mess behind. When I finished, the kitchen looked like it had before Emma's stormy visit. Tidy.com/mine, a fitting reflection of the direction I wanted everything else to go. Ordered, peaceful, and free from the chaos of someone who couldn't make up her mind. 3 hours left before dinner. Enough time to scan quarterly reports, reply to emails, maybe squeeze in a quick workout. The rhythm of progress felt good, more fulfilling than all those therapy sessions and forced reconciliation talks ever had. Then my phone rang. Unknown number. Vancouver area code. For a second, I wondered if it was Ryan, maybe calling to gloat, or was asking me to get Emma to stop calling him. But when I picked up, the voice was calm, female, and unfamiliar. "Mr. Chen, this is Sophie Kim. I think you know who I am." The silence stretched as I tried to find words. "Yes, I know who you are." "Good," she said briskly. "Then we can skip introductions." Her voice was cool and professional, someone who didn't waste time. "I'm calling because I think you and I need to talk." About Ryan, about Emma, and about a few things you probably haven't heard yet. I moved toward the window, staring out at the Seattle skyline. I'm listening, not over the phone. I'm flying into Seattle tonight for a meeting tomorrow. If you're open to it, I'd like to meet in person. I was caught off guard. Here was the woman Ryan had been seeing behind Emma's back now, calling me like we were business associates planning a casual meet. Why would you want to talk to me? 'Cause Ryan Hutchinson isn't who either of us thinks he is. And I have information I think you'll find very relevant. It's things that affect both of you even if you're no longer together. Hutchinson. The name stopped me cold. Emma had always referred to him as Ryan Mitchell, the name he'd gone by in college. Hutchinson. You didn't know? She asked, sounding genuinely surprised. He legally changed his name 3 years ago. Apparently there were complications, some involving his old identity, and not just business-related ones. My thoughts spun. If Ryan had changed his name, what else had he hidden? What kind of complications? The kind that attract the attention of federal investigators? Something about unaccounted funds from his last startup in California. But like I said, this isn't a phone conversation. She paused, then added, I'll be at the bar in the Fairmont Olympic Hotel at 8, navy blue blazer. I hope you'll come. Check the time. It was already 5:30, and I was supposed to meet Marcus at 7. But something in Sophie's voice, an undercurrent of urgency beneath her professional demeanor, made me reconsider my evening plans. I'll be there, I said, but I want to know what your angle is in all this. Why are you coming to me instead of just breaking up with Ryan yourself? Because, Sophie said, and for the first time her voice carried a hint of emotion. I'm not just his girlfriend, Mr. Chen. I'm also the primary investor in his current company. And 3 hours ago I discovered that my $2 million investment has disappeared into the same black hole as Emma's heart. The line went dead, leaving me staring at my phone and wondering what exactly I'd just agreed to. In the span of one afternoon, my quiet post-divorce life had suddenly become complicated, in ways I couldn't have imagined. I called Marcus to cancel our dinner, explaining only that something urgent had come up. He didn't push for details, but I could hear the concern in his voice when he told me to be careful. Marcus had been my business partner for 5 years, long enough to know that I didn't usually get involved in drama unless it was threatening something I cared about. By 7:45, I was sitting in the elegant bar of the Fairmont Olympic, nursing a whiskey and trying to piece together what I knew about Sophie Kim. The private investigator's report had been frustratingly brief, focusing more on documenting her relationship with Ryan than investigating her background. Successful marketing executive, no obvious red flags, appeared to genuinely care about Ryan despite his obvious character flaws. Sophie walked in precisely at 8, and I understood immediately why Ryan had been drawn to her. She carried herself with the confidence of someone who'd earned her success rather than inherited it, and her navy blazer was clearly expensive without being ostentatious. She was beautiful in the way successful women often were, polished and put together, but there was something in her dark eyes that suggested vulnerability beneath the professional facade. Mr. Chen. She approached my table without hesitation, extending a perfectly manicured hand. Thank you for agreeing to meet on such short notice. Alex, I said, standing to shake her hand, I have to admit, I'm curious about what could be so urgent that you'd fly to another city to discuss it with your boyfriend's ex-wife's ex-husband. Sophie's smile was rueful as she settled into the chair across from me. When you put it that way, it does sound rather complicated, doesn't it? She signaled the waitress and ordered a glass of Pinot Grigio before continuing. But then again, nothing about Ryan has ever been simple. How long have you known him? 18 months, officially. We met at a tech conference in Vancouver, and he was everything I thought I wanted in a partner. Successful, charming, full of big ideas about changing the world through innovation. She paused as the waitress delivered her wine. He told me he'd recently ended a long-term relationship. That hadn't worked out, that he was ready to focus on building something new with the right person. I could already see where this was heading. Let me guess. You were the right person? For about 6 months? Yes, we were inseparable. He introduced me to his business partners, brought me to family gatherings, even gave me a key to his apartment. When Novatech started struggling financially, I didn't hesitate to invest my savings to help keep the company afloat. $2 million is more than savings, I observed. Sophie's laugh was bitter. It was my inheritance from my grandmother, plus the proceeds from selling my condo in Toronto when I moved to Vancouver for a promotion. Everything I'd worked for, essentially, and then Emma appeared. Actually, Emma had been around longer than I realized. Ryan told me she was a freelance designer he'd hired for some marketing materials. Someone he'd known in college but hadn't spoken to in years. It wasn't until last month that I found out they'd been having an affair for over 6 months.
Ow.
Timeline clicked into place in my mind. Ryan had been seeing Sophie while pursuing Emma, lying to both of them about the nature of his relationship with the other. It was a level of deception that required impressive organizational skills, if nothing else. How did you find out? Emma called me. Sophie took a long sip of her wine, and I noticed her hand was trembling slightly. 3 weeks ago, completely out of the blue. She'd apparently gotten my number from Ryan's phone and wanted to have what she called an honest conversation between women. My eyebrows rose. That didn't sound like the Emma I knew, who had always avoided confrontation whenever possible. What kind of conversation? She told me that she and Ryan were in love, that they had a history I couldn't possibly understand, and that she thought I deserved to know the truth before things went any further between him and me. She was actually quite civil about it, almost apologetic. I tried to imagine that phone call, Emma working up the courage to contact her perceived rival directly. Suggested a level of maturity I wasn't sure she possessed, though it also raised questions about her motivations. What did you tell her? I told her she was mistaken, that Ryan and I were planning to move in together, and that whatever they'd had in college was ancient history. I may have been less civil than she was. Sophie's expression darkened. Then I confronted Ryan about it. What did he say? Said Emma was delusional, that she'd been pursuing him aggressively ever since he'd hired her for some consulting work, and that he'd been trying to let her down gently to avoid damaging their professional relationship. He showed me text messages from her that seemed to support his story, messages where she was clearly pursuing him romantically, despite his apparent lack of interest. I leaned back in my chair, processing this information. Either Ryan was an even better manipulator than I'd given him credit for, or Emma had been more desperate than I'd realized. But you didn't believe him. I wanted to believe him. But something about the whole situation felt wrong. So I hired a private investigator of my own. Now we were getting to the interesting part. And what did you find? Sophie reached into her purse and pulled out a tablet, opening it to a series of photographs. These were taken over the past month at various locations in Vancouver and Seattle. Images told a story I should have expected but somehow hadn't. Ryan and Emma at restaurants, walking hand in hand through parks, kissing in parking garages. But what caught my attention were the timestamps and locations. Many of the photos were taken on dates when Ryan had told Sophie he was traveling for business or working late at the office. He's been living a double life, I said, scrolling through the evidence. It's probably telling each of you what you wanted to hear while making sure you never compared notes. Exactly, and it gets worse. Sophie swiped to a new set of documents. My investigator also looked into Novatech's finances, specifically what happened to my investment. Alex, the company is completely bankrupt, has been for months. I looked up from the tablet, meeting her eyes. Where did the money go? That's what I've been trying to figure out. Officially, it went to product development and marketing expenses. But when I started digging deeper, I discovered that most of the vendors Ryan claimed to be paying don't actually exist. The money has been transferred to a series of shell companies, all of which trace back to personal accounts Ryan controls. The whiskey in my glass suddenly tasted like ash. He's been embezzling from his own company, embezzling from me. Specifically, I was the only major investor left after his previous backers pulled out. My $2 million was essentially keeping the lights on while he figured out his exit strategy. I handed the tablet back to her, my mind racing through the implications. Sophie, if what you're showing me is accurate, Ryan isn't just a cheating boyfriend. He's a criminal. I know. That's why I'm here. She closed the tablet and leaned forward, her voice dropping to almost a whisper. Alex, I need your help to expose him. Not just for my sake, but for Emma's too. She has no idea what kind of man she's gotten involved with. The irony wasn't lost on me. A woman who'd been sleeping with my ex-wife's boyfriend was asking me to help protect my ex-wife from her own poor judgment. What exactly are you proposing? Ryan is supposed to meet Emma in Vancouver tomorrow night. He's planning to break up with her, to tell her that their relationship was a mistake and that he's chosen me. What he doesn't know is that I've already moved my money out of his reach and filed a complaint with the Securities Commission. And you want me to what? Exactly? Warn Emma. Sophie shook her head. I want you to be there when it happens. I want both of you to see Ryan for who he really is, without any possibility of him talking his way out of it or manipulating the situation to his advantage. I stared at her, trying to understand her motivations. Why do you care what happens? To Emma, she's been sleeping with your boyfriend for months. For the first time since she'd sat down, Sophie's composure cracked slightly. Because I've been where she is. Alex. I've been the woman who believed a charming man's lies because I wanted the fairy tale to be real. The difference is, I had the resources to protect myself when I found out the truth. Emma doesn't. Made her choice when she left her marriage for Ryan. Whatever consequences come from that choice are hers to deal with. Are they? Sophie's voice carried a challenge. What if I told you that Ryan specifically targeted Emma because of her connection to you? That her divorce settlement was part of his long-term financial planning? The room seemed to tilt around. Me. What are you talking about? Sophie pulled out her phone and showed me a series of text messages. These are from Ryan's phone, which my investigator was able to access through some creative means. Look at the dates. Alex. These conversations with his business partner started 6 months before Ryan ever contacted Emma about consulting work. I read through the messages, each one hitting me like a physical blow. Ryan discussing Emma's wealthy ex-husband and her potential divorce settlement, calculating how much money she might be able to invest in Novatech once her divorce was finalized, strategizing about how to approach her without seeming too eager or obvious about his financial motivations. Emma was never the love of his life, Sophie said quietly. She was a mark, a lonely, financially comfortable woman with a history of being emotionally vulnerable to his particular brand of charm. I set the phone down carefully, fighting the urge to throw it across the room. The depth of Ryan's manipulation was staggering, but what made it worse was the realization that Emma had walked right into it. Her romantic nostalgia, her dissatisfaction with our stable but unexciting marriage, her need to feel special and desired, all of it had made her the perfect target for someone like Ryan. Does Emma know any of this? Not yet. But she's going to find out tomorrow night, one way or another. Ryan's planning to cut her loose now that her divorce settlement is finalized and he realizes she can't give him access to your business assets. The question is whether she finds out the truth in a way that might help her preserve some dignity, or whether she discovers it alone and defenseless. I looked at Sophie carefully, trying to read her true motivations. And you think having me there will somehow make this easier for her? I think having you there will prevent Ryan from spinning this as anything other than what it is. He can't claim he loved her and that circumstances forced them apart if you're standing there with evidence of his real intentions, and he can't try to manipulate her into giving him more money if she knows you're aware of what's happening. The logic was sound, even if the emotional implications were complicated. Sophie, why are you really doing this? You could expose Ryan to the authorities and get your money back without involving Emma or me at all. She was quiet for a long moment, staring into her wine glass. When she looked up, her professional mask had dropped completely, revealing something raw and vulnerable underneath. Because I loved him, she said simply. And I know Emma loves him too, even if that love is based on lies. We both deserve better than being discarded like used tissues when we're no longer useful to him. I understood then that this wasn't really about protecting Emma or exposing Ryan's crimes. This was about Sophie reclaiming some measure of control over a situation that had left her feeling powerless and foolish. She wanted Ryan to face both of his victims at the same time, wanted him to see the full scope of the damage he'd caused. What exactly do you want me to do? Sophie reached into her purse again and pulled out a hotel keycard. Ryan's meeting Emma at the Rosewood Hotel, Georgia tomorrow at 9 p.m., room 1247. He's already checked in using a credit card that's connected to one of his shell companies, which means he's probably planning to bill the room to his fake business. Expenses? You want me to just show up? I want you to show up with me at exactly 9:15. After they've had enough time to start the conversation, but before Ryan can control the narrative completely, Sophie's eyes were hard now, focused with the intensity of someone who'd been planning this moment for weeks. I want him to have to explain to both of us at the same time how he's been playing us against each other. I thought about Emma. Probably spending her day driving back to Vancouver full of hope and determination to fight for her relationship. She had no idea she was walking into an ambush that would expose not just Ryan's infidelity, but the calculated, mercenary nature of everything she'd sacrificed her marriage for. Part of me wanted to let her face that revelation alone. She'd made her choices, ignored every warning sign. She dismissed every piece of evidence that Ryan wasn't the man she wanted him to be. If she was about to discover that her great love story was actually an elaborate financial scam, maybe that was exactly what she deserved. But another part of me, the part that had loved Emma Rodriguez for 7 years and had wanted nothing more than to see her happy, couldn't bear the thought of her facing that kind of humiliation without any support, even if our marriage was over. Even if she'd chosen another man over everything we'd built together, she didn't deserve to be victimized by someone who saw her as nothing more than a source of funding for his fraudulent business ventures. All right, I said, finally taking the key card from Sophie's outstretched hand. I'll be there. But I want to be clear about something. This isn't about getting Emma back or trying to restart our relationship. This is about making sure Ryan faces the consequences of what he's done to both of you. Sophie nodded, relief evident in her expression. I understand. This is about justice, not romance. Good, because after tomorrow night, I want all of this to be finished. Whatever happens between you and Emma after Ryan's out of the picture is between the two of you. I'm done being collateral damage in other people's relationship drama. We finished our drinks in relative silence, both lost in our own thoughts about what tomorrow would bring. As we prepared to leave, Sophie turned to me one more time. Alex, can I ask you something personal? Depends on how personal. Do you still love her? Emma, I considered the question carefully, thinking about the woman who'd walked out of my kitchen that morning still believing in Ryan's lies despite the evidence of his betrayal. I love the person I thought she was, I said finally, but I'm not sure that person ever really existed. Sophie nodded, as if that answer made perfect sense to her. I know exactly what you mean. As I walked back to my car, I found myself thinking about the strange alliance I'd just formed with Sophie Kim. Tomorrow night, 3 people Ryan had manipulated most successfully would finally be in the same room at the same time. He'd spent months juggling his deceptions, keeping us separated and unaware of each other's existence, controlling the narrative through carefully managed information. But tomorrow, all of that control would disappear. Tomorrow, Ryan Hutchinson would have to face the full consequences of his actions, with nowhere to run and no one left to manipulate. I just hoped Emma was strong enough to handle what she was about to learn about the man she'd given up everything to be with. The flight to Vancouver was turbulent, matching my mood as I stared out at the clouds and tried to process everything Sophie had revealed. I'd barely slept after our meeting, spending most of the night reviewing financial documents she'd sent to my encrypted email. The evidence was damning and extensive. Ryan hadn't just stolen Sophie's money, he'd built an entire network of fraudulent companies designed to funnel investor funds into his personal accounts. What bothered me most wasn't the financial crimes, though those were serious enough to land him in federal prison. It was the psychological manipulation, the way he'd studied Emma's vulnerabilities and exploited them with surgical precision. The text messages Sophie had shown me revealed a man who viewed relationships as transactions, emotions as leverage points to be manipulated for maximum gain. First time in Vancouver? The businessman seated next to me was making polite conversation, apparently unaware that I was in no mood for small talk. Business trip, I replied curtly, hoping he'd take the hint. He didn't. Beautiful city. I'm here for a tech conference myself. Amazing how much innovation is happening up here these days. I almost laughed at the irony. Innovation. That's exactly what Ryan would call his elaborate scheme to defraud investors while simultaneously destroying 2 women's lives. The tech industry's obsession with disruption had apparently extended to personal relationships. "What line of work are you in?" the businessman continued. "Digital marketing," I said, then added with more honesty than I'd intended. "Currently working on a project involving fraud prevention," that finally shut him up. By the time we landed at YVR, I was second-guessing my decision to get involved in Sophie's plan. Emma had made her choices, and if those choices led to painful consequences, that wasn't my responsibility to fix. I'd given her 7 years of my life, supported her dreams, built a future around our partnership. She'd thrown all of that away for a fantasy, and now that fantasy was about to collapse in the most humiliating way possible. But as I collected my rental car and drove toward downtown Vancouver, I couldn't shake the image of Emma's face when she'd seen that video of Ryan. With Sophie, the shock, the betrayal, the dawning realization that her great love story might not be what she'd believed. She was about to experience that feeling magnified by 1,000. And despite everything she'd done to our marriage, I couldn't stand the thought of her facing it completely alone. My phone buzzed with a text from Sophie. "Just confirmed Ryan is already at the hotel. Emma's flight landed an hour ago. Are you having second thoughts?" I typed back. "I'm here. No second thoughts." It was a lie. I was having nothing but second thoughts. But I was also committed now, and backing out would leave Sophie to handle this confrontation alone. Whatever Ryan had done to me indirectly through his manipulation of Emma, what he'd done to Sophie was far worse. She deserved to have someone in her corner when she faced him. The Rosewood Hotel Georgia was exactly the kind of place Ryan would choose for a breakup conversation. Expensive enough to make him feel important, but public enough to limit the potential for dramatic scenes. I checked into a room on the 10th floor, 3 floors below where the real drama would unfold, and spent the afternoon reviewing the evidence Sophie had compiled. The financial documents painted a picture of systematic fraud spanning nearly 2 years. Ryan had created a web of shell companies with names similar to legitimate tech firms, using them to generate fake invoices and redirect investor funds. The money had flowed through multiple accounts before landing in offshore holdings that would be nearly impossible for authorities to trace. But it was the personal communications that revealed the true scope of his deception. Text messages showed him discussing Emma's emotional vulnerabilities with someone identified only as M in his contacts. They'd planned her seduction like a military operation, identifying her dissatisfaction with married life, her romantic nostalgia for their college relationship, her need to feel special and desired. Target shows classic signs of midlife relationship. Fatigue, one message read. Married young, feels like she missed out on passion. Perfect candidate for emotional manipulation via nostalgia triggers. Another exchange made my stomach turn. Divorce settlement confirmed at $3 million plus business stake. More than enough to float operations through Q4 while we establish Vancouver expansion. Emma hadn't just been collateral damage in Ryan's schemes. She'd been the primary target. Selected and groomed specifically because of her financial value and emotional vulnerability. Every romantic gesture, every whispered promise, every declaration of eternal love had been calculated to extract maximum value from her divorce settlement. At 8:30, I received another text from Sophie. In position, Emma arrived 10 minutes ago, went straight to his room. She looks optimistic. I could imagine Emma's state of mind as she knocked on Ryan's door. She'd probably spent the flight from Seattle convincing herself that the video I'd shown her had some innocent explanation, that her confrontation with Ryan would clear up any misunderstanding and strengthen their relationship. She had no idea that she was walking into a conversation designed to end everything she'd sacrificed for. My phone rang at 8-40-5. Sophie's voice was tense. "Alex, we have a problem. I can hear them through the door, and Ryan's not. Breaking up with her? He's asking for money." I grabbed my jacket and headed for the elevator. "What do you mean?" He's telling her that Novatech has a cash flow crisis, that he needs a short-term investor to prevent the company from going under. He's asking her to liquidate her divorce settlement and invest it in the business. The elevator seemed to move in slow motion as I processed this development. Ryan wasn't planning to discard Emma after all. He was planning to drain her financially. Before moving on to his next victim, it was a level of cruelty that exceeded even my worst expectations. "Sophie, how much can you hear? Enough?" She's asking questions about why he didn't mention this before, why he waited until now to tell her about the company's problems. He's giving her the full performance, talking about how he didn't want to burden her with business stress, how he was hoping to solve the problem himself. I reached the 12th floor and moved quietly down the hallway toward room 1247. Sophie was positioned near the stairwell, her ear pressed to a glass against the wall. It was a trick she'd probably learned from too many spy movies, but apparently it was effective. "What's Emma saying?" She's hesitating. She's asking about timelines, about what kind of return she could expect. She's not saying no, but she's not saying yes either. Through the door, I could hear the murmur of voices, but couldn't make out specific words. Ryan's voice was smooth and persuasive, the practiced tone of someone who'd had this conversation. Before with other victims, Emma's responses were quieter, more uncertain. "Alex," Sophie whispered, "I think she's going to do it. She's talking about calling her financial advisor tomorrow, about liquidating some of her assets." That was my cue. I couldn't stand by and watch Emma hand over her entire financial future to a man who saw her as nothing more than a convenient ATM. Whatever problems existed between us, whatever anger I still carried about her choices, she didn't deserve to be financially destroyed by a criminal who'd manipulated her emotions to gain access to her money. I knocked on the door. The voices inside stopped immediately. After a moment, Ryan's voice called out, "Yes, room service," I said, hoping my voice would be muffled enough not to be immediately recognizable. Footsteps approached the door, and I heard the security chain being removed. When the door opened, Ryan's confident expression shifted to confusion. Then recognition, then something approaching panic. "Alex." Emma's voice came from deeper in the room. "What are you doing here?" I pushed past Ryan into the suite, taking in the scene that had been carefully staged for seduction and manipulation. Candles flickered on the dining table, expensive. Wine sat breathing in crystal decanters. And Emma was curled on the sofa in a dress I recognized from our anniversary dinner 2 years ago. "Hello, Emma," I said, then turned to Ryan. "Or should I call you Ryan Hutchinson? I understand you've had some legal issues with your previous identity." Ryan's face went white, but he recovered quickly. "I don't know what you're talking about. And I don't know why you're here, but this is a private conversation between Emma and me." Actually, Sophie's voice came from the doorway behind me. "It's a conversation between Ryan and all of his victims." Emma stood up slowly, looking between the three of us with growing alarm. "Sophie, what's going on? Why is everyone here?" "Because," Sophie said, stepping into the room and closing the door behind her, "your boyfriend has been lying to both of us about everything, including his real name, his financial situation, and his reasons for pursuing either of our relationships." Ryan moved toward the window, clearly calculating his options. "This is ridiculous. Sophie, you're obviously upset about our breakup, but involving Emma and her ex-husband in some kind of revenge fantasy is beneath you." "Breakup?" Looked confused. "Ryan, what is she talking about? Who is this woman to you?" "It's his girlfriend," I said, pulling out my phone to show Emma the photos Sophie had shared with me. "Has been for over a year. It's the same woman you saw him kissing in that video yesterday." Emma sank back onto the sofa as if her legs had given out. "That's not possible. Ryan told me he ended things with her months ago, that she was just a business partner who couldn't accept that their relationship was over." "What else did Ryan tell you?" Sophie asked, her voice gentle despite the circumstances. "Did he tell you about the $2 million I invested in his company? Did he mention that Novatech has been bankrupt for months, or that he's been using shell companies to steal investor funds?" "Sophie, you're clearly having some kind of breakdown," Ryan said, but his voice lacked its usual confidence. "Emma, don't listen to this. She's been stalking me ever since I ended our relationship. This is all part of some elaborate harassment campaign." I pulled out the tablet Sophie had shown me the night before, opening it to the financial documents that detailed Ryan's fraudulent activities. "Emma, look at these bank records. Look at the dates and amounts. Fefi invested her life savings in Ryan's company, and he's been systematically stealing it through fake business expenses. Emma took the tablet with shaking hands, scrolling. Through the evidence, with growing horror. Ryan, what is this? These accounts? These companies? Why is your name on all of them? Those documents are fabricated, Ryan said, but he was backing toward the door now. This is obviously some kind of setup, probably orchestrated by Alex to get back at you for leaving him. The documents are real, Sophie said, pulling out her own phone. And so are these text messages from your phone, the ones where you discuss? Targeting Emma specifically because of her divorce settlement, she began reading from the screen. Target shows classic signs of midlife relationship fatigue. Married young, feels like she missed out on passion. Perfect candidate for emotional manipulation via nostalgia triggers. Emma's face went from pale to green. Ryan, please tell me that's not real. Please tell me you didn't write that about me. Emma, you have to understand, Ryan said, abandoning his denials and shifting to damage control. Business and personal relationships are complicated. Sometimes the lines get blurred. But what we have together, the connection we've always had, that's real. The connection you've always had is worth exactly $2.3 million. I said, reading from another message on Sophie's phone. That's what he calculated your divorce settlement was worth before he made contact with you. Emma stood up abruptly, the tablet falling to the floor. Stop. All of you, just stop. She looked at Ryan with an expression I'd never seen before. Something beyond heartbreak, beyond betrayal. It was the look of someone whose entire understanding of reality had just collapsed. Ryan, is any of it true? Did you ever love me, or was this all about money? Ryan opened his mouth to respond, but Sophie cut him off. Emma, show him the wire transfer authorization you were about to sign. Emma looked confused. What wire transfer? The one Ryan asked you to sign tonight? The one that would move your entire divorce settlement into his business accounts. Sophie's voice was cold now, prosecutorial. The one that would have completed his theft of everything Alex worked to build over 7 years of marriage? I never asked her to sign anything, Ryan protested. But Emma was already moving toward the dining table where a folder lay open next to the wine glasses. She picked up the papers, reading quickly, her expression growing more horrified with each page. Ryan, these are investment agreements for my entire settlement amount. You said this was just paperwork for the lawyers to review. It is just paperwork. Preliminary documents, nothing binding. Emma, you're letting them manipulate you into misunderstanding a routine business transaction? But Emma wasn't listening anymore. She was reading the fine print, the clauses that would have given Ryan complete control over her money with no recourse for recovery. The same clauses that had allowed him to steal Sophie's inheritance. You bastard, she whispered, and then, louder, you absolute bastard. This entire year, everything between us, it was all a lie. Emma, that's not true. My feelings for you are genuine. They always have been. The business situation is complicated, but it doesn't change what we mean to each other. Emma laughed, but it was a broken sound, devoid of any humor. What we mean to each other, Ryan. I left my husband for you. I gave up a marriage that was stable and loving and real because I thought what we had was some kind of destiny. I destroyed 7 years of my life for you. She turned to look at me then, and I saw tears streaming down her face. Alex, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry for what I put you through, for what I threw away. I thought I was choosing love over security, but I was really just choosing a fantasy over reality. Emma, I said quietly, you don't need to apologize to me right now. Right now, you need to focus on protecting yourself from this man. Ryan must have sensed that his manipulations had finally crumbled, because he abruptly turned toward the door. But Sophie stepped in his way, refusing to move. Ryan Hutchinson, she said with unwavering authority, you're not leaving this room until hotel security gets here. I've already contacted the Vancouver Police Fraud Division. They're eager to have a word with you about your business dealings. You don't have proof, Ryan shot back, though his face was red and glistening with sweat. Those files could be forged. The messages could be faked. No prosecutor will touch this. Maybe, I said, pulling out my phone. but they'll definitely want to hear this recording of you trying to scam Emma tonight. Washington is a single-party consent state, and I've been recording everything since I walked in. Ryan's eyes widened in panic as he finally grasped the reality he'd been so focused on keeping his cons separate that he never imagined what would happen if his victims joined forces. "This is entrapment," he said, voice rising. "You can't just record people without telling them not in Canada." Sophie smiled coldly. "Actually, you can. Canada also has single-party consent laws. And I've had this conversation. Recorded since before Alex showed up." Emma slumped onto the couch, burying her face in her hands. "I can't believe this. Can't believe I let it get this far." "You're not to blame," Sophie said gently. "You were manipulated by someone who's extremely skilled at deception. This isn't your fault, isn't it, though?" Emma lifted her head, glancing between us. "I saw what I wanted to see. I chose fantasy over facts, thrill over security. I gave up my marriage for a man who saw me as nothing but a source of income. I sat beside her, not too close, but offering whatever support I could. Emma, you made choices based on the lies he fed you. That doesn't make you the bad guy. That makes you another victim." "She's right," Sophie added, settling into a nearby chair. "You're not the first woman he's done this to, not even close. And unless we stop him, you won't be the last." Ryan had been silent, likely calculating how much legal trouble he was in. But now he spoke, his tone laced with panic. "Look, maybe we can find a solution. Sophie, I'll pay you back plus interest. Emma, what we had was real, even if the business side got messy. Alex, I know you want to protect her, but destroying me helps no one." I stood and walked toward him, my voice calm but firm. "Actually exposing you is exactly what helps. What? You prey on vulnerable women, you sell them lies, steal their money, and call it love? You need to be held accountable." Right on cue, a knock came at the door. "Vancouver police," a voice called. "We're here about a fraud report." Sophie moved to open it. Ryan made one final attempt to regain control. "Emma," he said, reaching toward her, "whatever happens, remember the good times. Don't let them convince you everything we shared was fake." Emma studied him for a long beat. When she finally spoke, her voice was quiet but resolute. "The only real thing between us was how I felt about you. Everything else, every promise, every moment, was just another part of your scheme. That means none of it was real." As the police stepped in and began reading Ryan his rights, he slumped against the wall, his carefully spun web finally unraveled. I couldn't help but think about how everything had led to this moment. Emma's betrayal ended our marriage, which made her vulnerable to Ryan, which ultimately brought her back to Sophie and me. It was karma, tangled and painful, but strangely fitting. As Ryan was led away in cuffs, Emma turned to us, eyes red but voice steady. "Thank you," she said. "I know you didn't have to do this, especially not for me." Sophie smiled, softening. "Emma, we're stronger together. That's something Ryan never understood." And for the first time since Emma had walked away from our life, I began to believe something good might come out of all the heartbreak. The police station was a far cry from the luxury of the hotel fluorescent lighting, the smell of disinfectant and stale coffee. Emma sat beside me on a hard plastic chair, her fancy dress rumpled, mascara long gone. Sophie stood near the window, speaking rapid French into her phone, likely to her attorney. Detective Martinez, a sharp-eyed woman in her 40s who handled Emma's initial statement with surprising compassion, returned with a hot cup of coffee and a folder full of documents. "Mrs. Rodriguez," she said, settling into the seat across from us, "I need to go over some details about the financial proposals Mr. Hutchinson showed you tonight. I know this is hard, but the more accurate you can be, the better chance we have of making these charges stick." Emma took the coffee with trembling hands. "I'll tell you everything. I just want to stop him from hurting anyone else. Let's begin with when he first mentioned needing money. Was tonight the first time, or had he brought it up before?" Emma paused, trying to dig through the fog of recent events. "Said something about cash flow problems a couple of weeks ago. Framed it like a temporary glitch, nothing serious. He told me he didn't want to stress me out and that he had it all under control. Did he explicitly ask for money back? Then no, not directly. But he mentioned how difficult it was to secure funding without giving up too much equity to outside investors. He said he wished he had a partner he could trust completely. Someone who understood that business investments were really investments in their shared future. Detective Martinez made notes as Emma spoke, and I found myself impressed by how clearly she was able to recount the conversation despite everything she'd been through. The Emma I'd been married to often struggled to remember details when she was upset, but crisis seemed to have sharpened her focus. And tonight, when he presented the investment documents, how did he explain the urgency? He said there was a narrow window to secure a major contract with a Vancouver tech company, but they needed proof of adequate funding before they'd sign the deal. He made it sound like if I didn't act immediately, we'd lose an opportunity. That could make us both wealthy beyond anything we'd imagined. Sophie finished her phone call and rejoined our group, her expression grim. My attorney says this is the third similar case she's aware of in the past 18 months. Ryan's been working his way through major Canadian cities, targeting recently divorced women with significant assets. The detective looked up from her notes. We've been in contact with authorities in Toronto and Calgary. There are at least 5 other women who filed complaints against various aliases Ryan has used. Your case tonight, with the documented evidence and recorded conversations, might be the key to tying all of these incidents together. Emma's face went pale. There are others. A medical professional in Toronto who lost her inheritance. A business owner in Calgary who invested her divorce settlement. A software engineer in Edmonton who liquidated her retirement savings. Sophie's voice was matter-of-fact, but I could see the anger underneath her professional composure. All of them were divorced within the past 2 years. All of them had significant assets. All of them fell for variations of the same romantic manipulation tactics. I watched Emma process this information, seeing the moment when she fully understood that she hadn't been special to Ryan at all. She'd been selected from a pool of potential targets based on specific criteria that made her vulnerable to his particular brand of deception. How does someone become that calculating? Emma asked, more to herself than to anyone else. How do you look at another person and see nothing but dollar signs? Detective Martinez had seen enough victims of financial fraud to have developed some theories. People like Ryan often start with smaller schemes and gradually escalate when they realize how effective emotional manipulation can be. By the time they're operating at this level, they've learned to compartmentalize completely. To them, victims aren't people with feelings and dreams. They're just opportunities to be exploited. The scary part, Sophie added, is how good he got at it. I consider myself a pretty savvy businesswoman, but he had me convinced that I was the most important thing in his life. Even when I started having doubts, he was always able to explain them away. Emma turned to look at me, her eyes still red from crying, but clearer than they'd been all evening.
Alex?
How did you see through him so quickly when I told you about reconnecting with Ryan? Why didn't you fight harder to stop me? It was a question I'd been asking myself for months, and I still wasn't sure I had a good answer. I think I knew something was wrong from the beginning, but I convinced myself. It was just jealousy. When someone you love tells you they're happier with someone else, you want to believe it's possible, even if it breaks your heart. But you didn't believe it, did you? Oh, deep down you knew something wasn't right about Ryan. I considered lying, telling her that I'd been completely blindsided by her affair. But Emma deserved honesty, especially after everything she'd been through tonight. I knew Ryan wasn't the man you thought he was. But I also knew that trying to convince you would only push you further away. I hoped that eventually you'd see the truth for yourself. It's just not like this, Emma said quietly. No, not like this. Detective Martinez cleared her throat, drawing our attention back to the legal proceedings. Mrs. Rodriguez, I need to ask about your financial accounts. Have you given Mr. Hutchinson access to any of your banking information, credit cards, or investment accounts? Emma shook her head. No, thank God. He asked about consolidating some of our finances for convenience, but I said I wanted to wait until we were living together officially. That's probably what saved you from losing everything tonight. Based on the documents he had prepared, his plan was to gain access to your accounts gradually, making it look like legitimate business transactions until he could move the bulk of your assets offshore. Sophie pulled out her tablet and showed the detective a series of bank transfers. This is exactly what happened to my money. Small amounts at first, for what seemed like legitimate business expenses, then larger transfers as the company needed more capital for expansion. By the time I realized what was happening, most of my investment was already beyond recovery. How much were you able to protect? I asked. About 60%. I moved the money to different accounts as soon as I discovered the fraud, but Ryan had already transferred the rest through his shell companies. Sophie's professional mask slipped for a moment, revealing the real pain underneath. It's not just the money, though. It's the violation of trust. It's the realization that someone you loved was systematically destroying your life while pretending to care about you. Emma reached out and touched Sophie's arm, a gesture of solidarity that surprised me. I'm sorry. I'm sorry for being part of what he did to you, even if I didn't know it. Emma, you don't need to apologize. We were both victims of the same predator. The only person responsible for what happened is Ryan. Detective Martinez finished her notes and closed the folder. I think we have everything we need for tonight. Mr. Hutchinson will be charged with multiple counts of fraud, theft, and identity manipulation. With the evidence we've gathered from all three of you, plus the information from the other cases, he's looking at significant prison time. What happens now? Emma asked. He'll have a bail hearing tomorrow, but given the flight, risk, and the scope of the charges, I expect he'll be held pending trial. You'll need to provide additional documentation over the next few weeks, bank records and communication logs, but the most difficult part is over. As we prepared to leave the police station, Sophie turned to both Emma and me with an expression. That was part exhaustion, part relief, and part something I couldn't quite identify. I know this might sound strange, but I'm glad we went through this together. Facing Ryan alone would have been terrifying. Having both of you there made me feel less powerless. Emma nodded in agreement. I keep thinking about what would have happened if you hadn't found out about the fraud, if Alex hadn't shown me that video yesterday. I could have signed those papers tonight and lost everything Alex worked so hard to build during our marriage. I looked at these two women who'd been pitted against each other by Ryan's manipulation, finding strength in their shared experience. Sophie, what will you do now? Will you stay in Vancouver for a while? No. I need to work with the attorneys to try to recover more of my money, and I'll probably testify in the other cases as well. But after that, I think I need a complete change of scenery. Maybe go back to Toronto or try somewhere entirely new. And you? I asked Emma. She was quiet for a long moment, staring out at the Vancouver skyline through the police station. Windows. I don't know. For the past year, every decision I made was based on building a life with Ryan. Now that's gone, and I'm not sure who I am without that fantasy. Oh, duh. You're the same person you were before Ryan came back into your life. I said, creative, intelligent, capable of building whatever kind of future you want. Am I, though? The person I was before Ryan was married to you, living a life I convinced myself wasn't enough? I'm not sure I can go back to being that person. You don't have to go back to being anyone. You can choose to become whoever you want to be now. Emma smiled for the first time since the hotel room confrontation. A small, tentative expression that reminded me of the woman I'd fallen in love with at Pike Place Market all those years ago. That's very wise advice from someone whose life I turned upside down. Emma, my life needed to be turned upside down. I was so focused on building security that I forgot to build happiness. Maybe we both needed this wake-up call, just not in the way it happened. Sophie had been listening to our conversation with interest, and now she spoke up with the directness I was beginning to recognize as characteristic of her personality. Can I ask you both something personal? Do you think there's any chance you might try to work things out now that Ryan's out of the picture? Emma and I looked at each other, and I saw the same mixture of sadness and acceptance in her eyes that I felt in my own heart. No, Emma said finally. What Ryan did to both of us showed me how much I'd been taking Alex for granted, how much I'd convinced myself that our marriage was somehow less valuable because it felt safe instead of exciting. But I can't undo the choice I made to leave. I can't ask Alex to forgive me just because my alternative turned out to be a lie. And I can't pretend that finding out about Ryan's true nature erases the fact that Emma chose him over our marriage, I added. We can forgive each other for what happened, and we can probably be friends eventually, but we can't go back to being married. Too much has changed. Sophie nodded as if our answer made perfect sense to her. I think that's probably the healthiest response you could have. You're both smart enough to understand the difference between loving someone and being able to trust them enough to build a life together. As we walked out of the police station into the Vancouver night, I found myself thinking about the strange journey that had brought us to this moment. Emma's betrayal had destroyed our marriage, but it had also revealed strengths in both of us that we might never have discovered otherwise. My business was more successful than ever, and Emma would eventually figure out how to rebuild her life on her own terms. Ryan's attempt to destroy us had ultimately made us stronger. Individually, and as people who'd learned hard lessons about trust, love, and the difference between security and happiness. Alex, Emma said as we reached the parking garage where our rental cars were waiting, "Thank you for showing me the truth about Ryan, for being there tonight when I needed support, for not letting me throw away everything you built just because I was too blind to see what was happening. Thank you for being brave enough to face the truth. When it was presented to you, not everyone would have been able to do that." Sophie pulled out her business card and handed it to both of us. "I know we met under strange circumstances, but I'd like to stay in touch. Maybe when all of this legal stuff is finished, we can meet for coffee under more normal conditions." I took the card, genuinely interested in maintaining the friendship that had formed through crisis. I'd like that. And Sophie, if you ever decide you want to explore opportunities in Seattle, Chen & Associates is always looking for talented marketing professionals. Emma looked surprised by my offer to Sophie, but then she smiled with what looked like genuine appreciation. That's a generous offer. Sophie, Alex is one of the best people to work with in the industry. If you're serious about a career change, you couldn't ask for a better opportunity. As we said our goodbyes and headed to our separate cars, I reflected on how much had changed in just 24 hours. Yesterday morning, I'd been a divorced man trying to move forward while his ex-wife chased a fantasy. Tonight, I was someone who'd helped 2 women escape from a predator's web while finally achieving closure on the most painful chapter of my own life. The future was uncertain for all of us, but for the first time since Emma had walked out of our marriage, uncertainty felt like possibility rather than threat. 6 months later, I stood in the lobby of my newly expanded Seattle office, watching Sophie direct the installation of a custom reception desk that perfectly matched the aesthetic we developed for the rebrand. Chen & Associates had become Chen & Kim's strategic marketing, and our client roster had doubled since Sophie joined as my business partner. "The Vancouver clients are confirmed for next week," she said, checking her tablet with the same efficient precision that had made her such a valuable addition to the team. 3 more tech startups want to discuss our fraud prevention marketing protocols. It was ironic that Ryan's criminal activities had inadvertently created a new market niche. For us, companies were increasingly concerned about protecting themselves from fraudulent partners and employees. And our first-hand experience with financial manipulation had given us unique insights into how these schemes operated. "Any word from Detective Martinez about the trial date?" I asked. "Mid-September. She says with all the evidence from the multiple jurisdictions, Ryan's legal team is pushing for a plea agreement. He's looking at 8 to 12 years and full restitution to all victims." Sophie had recovered most of her stolen investment through the prosecution's asset forfeiture process, though the emotional recovery had taken longer. The confidence that had initially impressed me about her had been rebuilt stronger than before, tempered by hard-won wisdom about trust and relationships. My phone buzzed with a text from Emma. "Opening night tomorrow. Nervous but excited. You again for the recommendation." I smiled, showing the message to Sophie. "Emma's gallery exhibition opens tomorrow. First solo show in downtown Seattle? That's wonderful. Are you going?" "Wouldn't miss it." Her work has always been incredible, but these new pieces are something special. Emma had channeled her experience with Ryan into a series of paintings exploring themes of deception, truth, and personal reconstruction. The preview images she'd shared were powerful, raw expressions of someone who'd survived manipulation and emerged with deeper understanding of her own strength. "It's amazing how much she's grown," Sophie observed. "When I first met her in that hotel room, she seemed so broken. No. She sounds like someone who's found her voice.
Emma.
Was never weak. She just got lost for a while, convinced herself that excitement was more valuable than substance. The whole thing with Ryan forced her to figure out who she really wanted to be. Sophie nodded, then gave me a look I'd learned to recognize over the months we'd been working together. Alex, can I ask you something that's probably none of my business? After everything we've been through together, ask away. Do you ever regret not fighting harder for your marriage? When you first found out about Ryan, do you wonder what would have happened if you'd been more aggressive about exposing him earlier? I'd asked myself that question countless times, especially during the long nights when building the new business had kept me at the office until dawn. I used to think I should have tried harder to save Emma from herself, but I've realized that she needed to make her own choices even if they were the wrong ones. If I'd forced her to see the truth about Ryan, she might have resented me forever for taking away her agency. And now, I think everything happened the way it needed to. Emma learned that she's capable of surviving on her own, that she doesn't need someone else's validation to have value. I learned that I'm stronger than I thought, that losing someone I loved didn't destroy me. Sophie was quiet for a moment, watching the installation crew position our new company logo on the wall behind the reception desk. And what about us? Do you think we would have become friends under normal circumstances? It was a question. That had occurred to me as well, especially during the late nights when we'd worked together to build the business expansion. Our professional partnership had evolved into something deeper, though we'd both been careful not to rush into anything that might complicate our working relationship. I think we would have been too polite to each other, I said honestly. Too careful about maintaining professional boundaries. Going through crisis together stripped away all the pretense and showed us who we really were underneath. Good point. I probably would have dismissed you as just another successful businessman who didn't understand what it meant to work for everything you had. And I probably would have seen you as impressive but intimidating, someone who'd achieved too much. Success too, Isalie. Both completely wrong assumptions. Completely wrong. Sophie finished her notes and walked over to where I was standing by the windows that overlooked Elliott Bay. Alex, I've been thinking about something. About timing and second chances, and how sometimes the worst things that happen to us lead to the best things. I turned to face her, recognizing the tone that meant she was about to say something important. What kind of thinking? The kind where I realize that I'm falling in love with my business partner? I'm trying to figure out if that's incredibly stupid or incredibly right. The honesty of it caught me off guard, even though I'd been feeling the same way for weeks. For what it's worth, I've been having the same incredibly stupid or incredibly right thoughts. Really? Really? Keep thinking about how we met through disaster, but built something beautiful together anyway. We've seen each other at our worst and somehow ended up here. Sophie stepped closer, close enough that I could see the flecks of gold in her dark eyes. I never thought I'd be able to trust anyone again after Ryan. But working with you, seeing how you handle challenges and treat people, especially how you treated Emma even after everything she put you through, it changed something for me. Sophie, I need you to know that you're not a rebound or a consolation prize. What I feel for you has nothing to do with getting over Emma and everything to do with discovering who you are. I know. That's what makes this feel real, instead of like another mistake. When Sophie kissed me, it felt like coming home after a long journey through uncertain territory. Not the desperate passion that Emma had chased with Ryan, but something deeper and more sustainable. The kind of love that builds slowly on foundation of genuine respect and shared experience. When we broke apart, Sophie smiled with the confidence I'd come to associate with her best decisions. So what happens now? Now we figure out how to balance being business partners with being whatever this becomes. Think we can handle it? I looked around the office we'd built together, thought about the challenges we'd already overcome and the future we were creating. I think we can handle anything. My phone buzzed again, this time with a photo from Emma's gallery prep. Was standing in front of a large canvas titled Reconstruction. Her face glowing with the kind of satisfaction that comes from creating something meaningful from painful experience. She looks happy, Sophie observed, looking over my shoulder. At the image, she looks like herself again, maybe for the first time in years. And you? How do you look? I pulled Sophie closer, feeling the solid reality of what we'd built together, professionally and personally. I look like someone who learned that sometimes the end of one story is really the beginning of a better one. Seattle sparkled in the afternoon sun, full of possibilities neither of us could have imagined when we first met in crisis. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities, new chances to build something lasting and real. But today, standing in the office we'd created together with the woman who'd become my partner in every sense of the word, I felt like the luckiest man alive. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.